What's up guys, C2113 here, and today I'm going to be giving you my full review on the Cat S61 rugged smartphone. Okay guys, so before I start the review, I just want to say this is going to be a little bit different than my typical reviews. I know in the past when I've done a review, I've sort of done what I like, followed by what I don't like, and two big sections. But I think that can be a little bit difficult for people to sit through, and if they have a specific section that they want to hear. So just know all timestamps for different sections will be in the description below. And also I'm going to break it up into each part of the phone that I feel like is relevant as its own category. But with that being said, let's go ahead and get into the review. First, let's start with the battery. The S61 has a 4500 milliamp hour battery. Now, by modern smartphone standards, that's very large. And that also, of course, combined with the Snapdragon processor, which is more power efficient than a lot of these smaller Chinese brand rugged smartphones with MediaTek type processors, is very power efficient, and that lends itself to some very good battery life. Now, in my previous videos, I've mentioned several times that whatever phone I have, I like to always keep it paired up with a JBL Extreme Bluetooth speaker that I carry around with me, because I like to listen to music on a speaker. I like to watch videos through my speaker if I'm working on the car, if I'm working outside, even if I'm just working in the house. I like to have the speaker with me. I'm not a big fan of headphones. And so always having Bluetooth on and paired is going to take a hit on battery life. That's just how it is. Even with Bluetooth connected and on, and my brightness set to about a quarter, as you see there, which is, I have auto brightness off, so it always stays at that level, and I think that's pretty bright. I was able to get almost 12 hours of screen on time. That is absolutely incredible, considering that my iPhone 7 Plus struggles to get 5 hours of screen on time with the same exact setup and brightness and Bluetooth. That's absolutely amazing, and something that I really do love, because that means even rocking the Bluetooth speaker all day, I don't have to recharge at all throughout the day, and at the end of the night I usually have about 20 to 25% left. If I'm not using Bluetooth, and most people probably won't use Bluetooth as often as I do, and certainly not for the whole day, I was able to get almost 20 hours of screen on time with Bluetooth turned off. Again, nothing else different. Brightness, same level, auto brightness off, all radios on, battery saver mode not on, and I was able to get almost 20 hours of screen on time. Again, that's incredible. And again, I'm not using it lightly or whatever. We're talking, using apps, opening the thermal camera occasionally. Now, one thing to note is the thermal camera is by far the most power-intensive app you can use on this phone. We're talking in about 10 to 15 minutes of use, you will drain more than 7% of your battery. And that is a giant battery as well. So again, keep that in mind. If you use the thermal camera a lot, your mileage may vary when it comes to battery life. But using it sparingly every now and then, opening other apps, using Google Maps, using checking on the air meter here, using the measuring tool, playing music, using Pandora, watching YouTube videos, browsing Facebook, all of these things, and I was able to get almost 20 hours of battery life. So that is pretty incredible. Now, let's talk about the design and exterior build quality. So the S61 incorporates one thing that is a vast improvement over the S60, and that is revised port covers. Number one, what they've done is they've taken both the charging port, which is now USB-C instead of micro USB, good, and the headphone jack, and they've taken both of these ports and waterproofed them internally. That means the connectors themselves are completely isolated and sealed off from the rest of the phone, and they themselves are waterproof, meaning water cannot enter through there. And they also incorporate corrosion-resistant materials such as gold plating and zinc to avoid corrosion in saltwater environments. So that's how this can be rated for saltwater immersion and survival despite the ports not being sealed off. Now, in addition, these port covers now don't have to do the duty of sealing all the water out. Instead, they're mainly splash seals. They keep wood particles, dust, and sand out of your charging port and your headphone jack. But other than that, they aren't actually necessary to keep water out, which I really like. These port covers are much more flexible than the ones on the Cat S60, and as such are much less likely to break. And because they're not absolutely necessary for water resistance, if you were to lose one, it wouldn't be critical in terms of keeping water out of your phone. Now, another thing that Cat has improved is removing that flappy door on the back that used to house your SD card and your SIM trays. Now, of course, it made it convenient to change things out, but also it could easily be knocked open with a hard enough drop at the right angle. Instead, Cat's opted for a tray on the side here, more conventional tray, but it's very tight, and you can see here I'm prying it with my fingernail, and even then I'm not able to easily get it out. Now, it's a slightly annoying thing when you're trying to put in a SIM card, but it's a good thing when it comes to water ingress protection because it's not going to fall out on its own. There's nothing here to catch on. It's completely flush with the body of the phone. You really need to use a fingernail or something intentionally trying to pry it open to get it open. And it has a tight gasket inside as well. Unavoidable, of course, is that it's thick and it is also very slippery. The aluminum, the anodized aluminum of the frame, it doesn't offer a whole lot of grip. Now, the back is nice because it's got rubber on it, and that I think is a very nice touch, better than the S60 with the slick plastic on there, and certainly offers a little bit more drop protection as well with the rubber, just a little more shock absorption. So I do like that, but it still can be a little bit difficult to hold. And combined with the fact that it's slippery on the sides here, you can see it's kind of slick, it can be difficult to type, especially if you're, let's say, lying down in bed or on your side, or you're at an odd angle and using just one hand. It can be difficult to kind of get a good grip on it. So that's a little bit of a downside. Then the other thing that I would say is an issue with the exterior design is the simple fact that, again, they've gone with a bare exposed aluminum frame. Now, obviously, this thing is drop certified from up to 6.5 feet with repeated drops, and it can even maintain its water resistance after that. Still, the issue remains that there is no padding on this frame, which means any impact is going to directly impact the frame and cause denting, damage, and deformation. And when you deform the frame, you increase the chance that you're going to compromise your water resistance. And also, you're going to compromise the structural rigidity and just make the phone a little ugly. Now, don't get me wrong, it's a rugged phone, so for most people that are going to use it, appearance isn't super important. You know what I mean? At the end of the day, if their phone gets scratched up, scraped up, whatever, dented a little bit, they're not going to care. At the end of the day, the only thing that matters is it stays waterproof and it stays working. But again, having impacts on an aluminum frame is eventually going to compromise the structural strength of the phone. I really think, like on the S41 and other rugged phones in their lineup, they should at least line the frame with some sort of rubber or silicone. And if they really wanted to be thorough, they could make those rubber or silicone pieces replaceable with screws or some other method so that when they wear out or get torn, it can be replaced. Now, again, I understand that adds in a lot of engineering cost and design complexity, but that's something that they really should consider. And if they really decide against that and they decide that in the future that isn't feasible or isn't within their scope of design, I think they should go with a different material. Now, I understand why they went with aluminum. It's lighter and it still has a pretty good strength to weight ratio. It has one of the best strength to weight ratios. But it doesn't beat out stainless steel for rigidity and impact resistance. And although stainless steel would undoubtedly be heavier, I mean, let's be honest here. This is a rugged smartphone. Nobody cares how much it weighs. If they did, you wouldn't buy this. You'd buy a Samsung or an iPhone. That's just how it is. This phone is designed to survive impacts, water, dust, dirt, and abuse. So if they want to maintain a truly open metal frame phone that can stand up to heavy drops and abuse and not compromise water resistance, I really think stainless steel would be a better choice for the frame material. Now, let's get into the software. So As far as the software goes, I didn't run into any issues with lag or slow performance. I mean, you can see here, it's well over a week into owning this phone. I've filled up the built-in storage by about 75%. I've installed all kinds of apps. I've got different widgets and things running here. And again, no lag at all. So I'm really pleased about that. This is despite there being only 4 gigs of RAM. And this is my first point of improvement. When I first saw the specs for this phone and they listed the RAM as only 4 gigs, I was a little disappointed because on the S60, as much as I was interested in that phone, I shied away from it because of multiple issues with durability and also the lackluster specs, and especially only 3 gigs of RAM. Now obviously they stepped it up. They added an extra gig of RAM in here, so you've got 4 gigs of RAM. And while I never ran into any lag issues or any slowdowns of any kind, 6 gigs really would be a better choice. Not too much. This phone doesn't need 8 gigs, you know, but I think 4 is just on the cusp of not quite enough. And the reason I say that is, although I haven't run into any crashes or any outright lag issues, if I open up the thermal camera app and then I close it again later, if I then open a bunch of other apps, I'll often get a notification saying it's stopped running and it's closed. And this is almost always due to the fact that available RAM has decreased to the point where it can't stay running in the background anymore and it has to close and shut down completely. Again, this isn't a problem and I've never run into an issue where the app stopped working while I was using it. But again, sometimes it happens when I'm switching. And again, if you're doing something, let's say you're checking the thermals of some sort of wiring, some sort of electrical panel or something else, and then you want to reference a chart in a different app and then come back, that's going to be a problem if your thermal camera app then crashes and you have to restart it. It's not the end of the world, but again, in terms of system productivity, I think it would have benefited from just a little bit more RAM. The same can be said about the processor. It's got a Snapdragon 630 in it, which is by no means a terrible processor, but again, a faster, higher end processor wouldn't have hurt, because again, for those tasks where they're very resource intensive apps like your thermal camera, and you're combining that with using multiple different apps at the same time, it is a slowdown in the sense that it would speed things up a little bit. And I think that these are things that people might even be willing to pay a premium over the already premium price for this phone. Now I just want to touch on the S61 specific apps, like the My FLIR app for the thermal camera, your Air app for measuring your VOCs and air quality, and your digital laser measuring tape app. Now, all 3 of these apps work very well, and I've had very few issues with them, and they're definitely adequate. However, there are still a couple quirks and nitpicks that I'm not super happy about. On the measuring tape app, now that I've had the phone for a while and I've played with the settings, it seems to have fixed itself after I reset the settings a couple times. But when I first got the phone, it seemed like no matter what I did, every time I closed the app, it would revert back to centimeters for its unit of measurement, even though I had set it to inches every time. Now it seems like it works just fine, but before that was incredibly annoying because for me, inches are far more meaningful than centimeters, and I'm sure it's vice versa for those of you that use the metric system. But again, depending on what you want your measurement unit to be on, I think most people would want it to be in memory. That is, every time you open the app, it stays on whatever unit you had it set to last. Anyway, it seems to function now, but hopefully that's 100% solidified in updates in the future. When it comes to the air quality app, I haven't had too many issues. As you can see here, it's very easy to read, it's clear, it's easy to understand. But the one thing I will say is that sometimes when you're looking at this chart view, this graph view, you'll sometimes see random lines intersecting with the graph. And although it's generally easy to discern where the actual trend is and where the erroneous data is, it's a little annoying that sometimes it randomly plots lines through your clean graph showing you your air quality over time. Now, this generally seems to happen after I restart the phone, and it takes the sensor a little while to restart. And there's a little gap in between, and I guess it tries to extrapolate some data and it messes up. But again, this is something I hope they fix in an update. But other than that, the app works great, As you see, it gives me a great breakdown of overall air quality, and it charts everything out. Now, some might argue that this app is a little too oversimplified, but I generally like it. It's easy to read. And I guess the only thing I could say maybe is that I wish they had offered some sort of export functionality to be able to export the data into some sort of PDF or something else so that you can read this on a later format or chart this longer term. Because as you can see, it only charts about a week. It doesn't go further than that. Okay guys, so here we are. The S61 has a total of 3 cameras. 2 on the back, your thermal FLIR sensor and your visible light 16 megapixel camera capable of 4K video, and your visible light selfie camera on the front. I've just got a security shutter on here, but it's an 8 megapixel shooter on the front. Now, the visible light cameras are a vast improvement over the S60, with greater resolution and greater color reproduction and dynamic range. However, they're still not on par with a flagship camera. Right here, you'll see some shot comparisons between the S60's rear camera and the iPhone 7 Plus's rear camera, and the S60's front camera and the iPhone 7 Plus's front camera. So hopefully you can see from that comparison that it's just not quite on par with flagship phones. Now again, I'm not asking this camera to be the world's best smartphone camera, but it needs to be able to keep up with the best of them. And I think at $1,000, it is a difficult cost proposition for somebody who wants to make this their everyday phone. And I think, even if they had to add $100 to the price to improve the cameras, I think people will be willing to pay for that. Another issue that I have with the camera is the slow shutter speed. And you'll see here, I'm even using an improved camera app, but I'll also compare it to the factory app. And you'll see here, it takes an incredibly long time for the shutter to close. Even if I use the factory camera app, which I find a little bit inadequate because of its lack of customizations, even if I tap to focus and snap a picture, it takes an incredibly long time for it to actually process the image. So I find that even after it's already closed the virtual shutter, if I move the phone before it processes and shows it up in my camera roll, the image will have motion blur. And again, a camera this slow is extremely disappointing because it is a pretty good camera on the rear, but the fact that it's incredibly difficult to get a still shot with a lack of optical image stabilization, it becomes difficult to get good pictures. Now granted, I'm not trying to dog on this phone for its cameras completely because it is possible to get good pictures. It's just more difficult. And again, if you ask me, I would be much happier with some better cameras on here for a little bit extra money. Now the last thing to talk about, of course, is the thermal camera. Now the thermal camera is far better than the S60's thermal camera in 2 ways. Now I mentioned this in my unboxing, but I'll just go over it in more detail here. First of all, the thermal sensor on its own, the FLIR Lepton sensor, has double the resolution and 4 times the pixels. So originally on the S60, the thermal resolution, that is just the thermal sensor alone, without the MSX overlay technology, had a resolution of 90 by 60. The S61 has a thermal resolution of 120 by 160. That is a huge improvement. It improves the clarity of the thermal image. That, combined with the fact that the MSX overlay is now able to overlay a full HD image outline pattern. So you can see when my hand shows up here, the clarity is so much better than on the S60. And this, I would say, is where they spent a lot of their effort on the improvements. And I think it really has paid off because using this has been a pleasure and a joy. And it does really offer great clarity, especially when you're trying to use the thermal camera to diagnose issues and be able to identify specific details in what you're looking at. But now I want to talk about the display. This phone has a 5.2-inch display with 1080p resolution at 424 pixels per inch. Now it's really clear. It has a higher pixel density than even my 7 Plus, and it's covered in Gorilla Glass 5. It even comes with a factory applied tempered glass screen protector, which I really like for two reasons. Number one, because it's nice to have one installed for you at the factory, bubble free. And number two, because they're really difficult to find on the market right now. Nobody is selling accessories for this phone yet, and so having one pre-installed is great to protect the screen. The screen has really good viewing angles as well. Off-axis performance is very good. As you can see here, I'm sure, very good off-axis performance on the screen. Also, the brightness, it gets really bright. Now I'm going to just do a quick demo here. It's not going to come out great on camera, but I'll just crank the brightness and you can see it. You can barely see what's on the screen anymore. And while it's blinding to look at when you're indoors, if you're outdoors, this becomes invaluable to have when there's bright sunlight glaring down on your screen. So that's nice. About the only criticism I have for the screen is that it doesn't get as dim as I'd like. And you might ask, well, why the hell would you want the screen to get dim? And well, that's mainly because when you're in bed at night, you're trying to adjust your eyes to the dark to get yourself to go to sleep. Having this brightness be as high as it is, even at the lowest setting, which is there, is a little bit irritating because, again, you just constantly feel like the brightness is too high, but you can't turn it any lower. If we compare it to my iPhone here, no comparison. I mean, the iPhone is way darker, but still can achieve a similar upper brightness. Obviously, the S61 has a beat for total maximum brightness. Now, I want to talk about the integrated tools built right into the phone. So the S61, of course, has three major features built into it. Now, one of them I already touched on, which is the built-in thermal camera, but the other two are your laser pointer, your laser guided distance tool, which is your distance measuring tool, and your VOC air quality measurement tool. Now, this is certainly innovative to have all of these integrated into a single device that's also an incredibly rugged smartphone, and certainly great to have on hand for a variety of different fields. However, even though it's nice to have all these integrated into a single device, and Cat has also been able to do a great job choosing a good array of tools to integrate in, they're not without their issues. Now, mainly, again, this goes back to the software. The load times for some of these apps is pretty significant. Not in any way that's going to be a deal breaker in my opinion, but just slight annoyance. So to open the thermal camera, it takes a significant amount of time for the FLIR app to open up. And I definitely think that this would be improved with more RAM and specifically a faster processor. When it comes to the other apps, again, your measurement tool app as well, you can see I've had it open. It opens quicker once it's been preloaded. But if you're loading it for the first time, which you might have to if you run out of RAM and it closes in the background, it can be a bit slow to open up. But again, these are things that I think would be improved with a slightly faster processor. Again, I don't think anybody is buying this phone expecting top of the line specs, blazing high speed, great 3D gaming. They just want their tool apps to work properly. When it comes to the VOC air quality meter, there's a couple issues. Now, of course, your sensor holes are located on the side. And if you don't immediately see a problem with this, you should. And the main issue that I have with it is just the location. Now, most people are right-handed, and most people that are going to use this phone are probably right-handed. And when you hold the phone with your right hand, you cover up most or all of the sensor holes. And basically, you make it difficult for the sensor to function. Now, obviously, I'm assuming they mean that you'll have this phone sitting somewhere on the job site or something like that. But again, that is an issue. In addition, when you have your hand over the sensor and warming up this part of the aluminum frame, you're going to get inaccurate temperature and humidity readings. And again, that's unfortunate, because again, I think this is a very useful tool otherwise to do that. Now it's not impossible to use your air quality meter at all. It works just fine, especially for its most important function, which is air quality. As long as you don't cover up the hole, it does a perfectly fine job detecting VOCs and that sort of thing. And for humidity and temperature, if you're really concerned about it, you can hold it with your left hand and let it cool down a little bit and air out, get some accurate readings, or even just put the phone down on a table to get a reading. But that is my nitpick with the air quality meter. Now, with the laser distance tool, my biggest gripe with that probably just is poor low light performance, but given that it's using a visible light camera, there's not much that I can complain about there. I mean, it has to use a visible light camera to detect that laser dot, and it can't do that if it can't see the substrate that the laser is being projected on. So that's not a huge deal for me. Next, I want to talk about networking. This phone has been great when it comes to wireless networks. Number one, the Wi-Fi is extremely fast, it's never disconnected, and it seems to get even better signal strength than my iPhone. Same goes for LTE and cellular signal. It seems to have a better antenna than any smartphone I've ever had, and it seems to get the same lightning fast speeds on both Wi-Fi and LTE. My issue with networking comes to a head with the revised SIM setup on this phone over the S60. Now the S60, of course, that had that flappy door on the back that allowed you to store 2 SIMs and a micro SD card. So you could run a dual SIM setup and a micro SD card. However, by moving back to the more traditional tray design on the S61, they've removed the space for one of those cards. And what that means is you can either run a dual SIM setup or a single SIM and an SD card, but you can't run a dual SIM and an SD card. And I know that for some, this might be a deal breaker, because for some people, they're going to use this as their primary phone. They're going to want as much storage as they can possibly get. They're going to want to get a giant SD card with a lot of storage capacity, and they're going to want to run both their business and personal phone numbers on here. And being unable to do that because of this right here, I'm imagining is a huge downside. And for some, like I said, might be a deal breaker. Now for me, it's not, because I barely even used up the built-in 64 gigs of storage. But I imagine that if I want to get a secondary number at some point in the future, this could be a little bit of a point of contention. But still, that's important to keep in mind when you're considering the S61. Lastly, I want to go into the speaker and microphone. This phone's primary speaker is a single mono speaker on the bottom, and although it's not a stereo setup like on the 7 Plus and all modern iPhones, it's still very clear, very loud, and has good fidelity. Just to show you what it's like, I'm going to go ahead and play some copyright-free music so you can get an idea for what it sounds like. And I'll even do a comparison with the iPhone. So like always, I'm going to be using the song Late Night Snack by Gunnar Olsen. That's at max volume. And now we'll go ahead and try that on the iPhone. So I don't know if you can tell, although the iPhone certainly has a stereo setup and slightly better bass reproduction, overall this is more than I expected out of a phone with a waterproof speaker that's waterproof to almost 10 feet. Earpiece speaker is also very clear, and I have no problems with phone calls, and sometimes even find that it might be too loud, but it's very clear, crisp, and I never have problems understanding people on the phone. So that is also very important, because again, if you're working somewhere in a loud work environment, having a earpiece speaker that gets loud enough can be important. When it comes to the microphone, it's also very clear, and I haven't had any major complaints on the phone, but my one complaint might be that it has poor wind cancellation. So wind noise can be a bit of an issue if you're on the phone, and the other person might struggle to hear you over the wind. So that's a little bit of a downside. I'd like to see that improved, but certainly not a deal breaker. And of course, the last point, something that you really can't avoid on a rugged device, is that the speaker and microphone can sound muffled when they're wet. If you wash the phone or get the phone wet, it will take up to an hour for the speaker and microphone to dry out enough to the point where phone calls and music won't sound a bit muffled. But anyway, guys, that's my full review. All in all, I'm still very happy with this phone. It's still living in my pocket as my daily driver, and I definitely would recommend this if you're looking for a rugged phone. I mean, the reality is getting a rugged phone is always an exercise in some sort of compromise, and I think as far as compromise goes, this might be the phone with the least compromises on the market. It offers so much and sacrifices so little. But anyway, thanks for watching. If you have any questions, comments, you know what to do, leave them below. If you liked the video, give me a like. And if you want to see more, get subscribed, because I'm going to be making more videos on this phone.